In the fall of 2006, I was enrolled in an oral history class in the University of Utah. The focus of this class was to interview hospice patients about their lives and transcribe the interviews into memoirs. The people we interviewed, talked to understood that their memoirs were going to be their legacy, testaments to how they lived their lives and wanted to be remembered. And yet, I picked Vaughn from a hat. Vaughn Williams was an 88-year-old man whose death was guaranteed by an advanced stage of stomach cancer. After the professor finished reading his bio to me, she said, "Oh, this is interesting. He says here that he's the inventor of the barcode." Up until then, I really hadn't had much experience in dealing with old people, but I am well-versed in calling them on their crazy bullshit when they're not around. He could have claimed that he was the inventor of silkworms or that floaty ball in the can of Guinness, both of which would be more plausible than barcodes. I strolled into his retirement home with my tape recorder and the skepticism of a hard-boiled reporter, ready to find a hole in the evidence. I hadn't even met the man, and I was hell-bent on proving him wrong. And during this time, I was also watching a lot of horror movies. Anyone who knows me will tell you that I'll sit through the worst movies during the month of October if there's even a prospect of blood. And the cheesier the better. That year, the movies were as much of an escape for me as they were entertainment. It was easier to deal with the stylized death than the impending death of my hospice patient. One of the most memorable movies I watched was called Watcher in the Woods, that, in the tradition of Something Wicked This Way Comes and the Peanut Butter Solution, was a children's movie that didn't pull any punches with its scares. I'd like to think that some of the emotional scarring I endured by watching these types of movies while young made me into the man I am today. A man who's not afraid of children's movies. And if any of you have seen the Peanut Butter Solution or knows what I'm talking about, meet me afterwards so we can high-five for being better human beings than anybody else in the room. The basic plot of Watcher in the Woods involves an American family who rents the biggest and therefore most haunted house while vacationing in merry old England. And surprise, something starts watching them. Is it the blindfolded twin girl that shows up in reflections? Or is it the creature wearing the terrifying Betty Davis mask? The movie never really offers any answers until the end when everything gets explained through parallel dimensions. As expected, all the scares are pretty tame, except Betty Davis Mugg, which has now replaced the ass-to-ass guy from Requiem for a Dream as my default night terror. What's left is an atmospheric movie that tries really hard to make wind look scary. So Watcher in the Woods is forgettable at best, unless you watch the alternate ending. Oh, that's the name of the show. Now cut back to my hospice patient, Vaughn. During my interview, I didn't take long to learn that he was an accomplished man who took great pride in his career. An engineer at Space Technology Laboratories, he helped develop Thor missiles and claimed to have taught the King of Romania how to fly a Learjet, which in hindsight sounded a little more ridiculous than the barcodes. I sat there not paying attention, trying to get him to talk about the barcodes. I felt like a villain in some techno thriller from the mid-90s. Just give me the fucking barcodes, old man. Oh, and did I also mention that this was during the time of my life that I was a huge asshole? Finally, there was a pause in the conversation. I sneered. "So, I hear you're the inventor of barcodes." I didn't even hide the sarcasm. "Oh yeah," he said, and brought out what looked like an orange reflector about the size of a highway mile marker. "It's an early form of the barcode, used on train tracks," he said. The gist of what he said was that these devices logged a train's arrival and departure from a station, thereby creating an electronic registry of everything. I left the nursing home confused. I certainly didn't want to develop a Tuesdays with Maury relationship with the guy. But I knew that my skeptical attitude had made me prickly. Who was I to say that these little reflector thing didn't pave the way for what became the staple of American commerce and bad tattoo choices with people with Adbuster subscriptions? This man believed he had invented the barcodes, but everything, his explanation, the history, it didn't add up. Going back to edit his memoir, I was faced with the conflict of either validating his claims, which made him sound batshit crazy, or leaving something out of his legacy that was important to him. Now, to say that the alternate ending to The Watcher in the Woods is the greatest thing to grace films would be an overstatement. But since I'm kind of drunk and prone to making wild exaggerations, I'm going to say that The Watcher in the Woods is the greatest fucking thing to ever grace film. Imagine you just sat through an hour and a half of ominous atmospherics and moodiness and wind, and in the last 5 minutes, a bat/beta fish/skeleton thing rips through the cosmic time-space continuum, shoot lasers from its eyes, and teleport the heroine into another dimension, who then somehow finds her twin who's been frozen in time for 40 years and returns back to their original time, so that the kind of twin can reunite with her mother, the frightened Betty Davis. And as the titular Watcher is concerned, well, he can go home now, wherever that may be, and sing. Watcher in the Woods' alternate ending doesn't make sense, but it's so ambitious, so out of left field, that it feels right. It's memorable. It makes the original ending feel like a cop-out, like it was squashed in favor of mediocrity. When I sat down to put the finishing touches on Vaughn's memoir, I thought of Watcher in the Woods. Like that alternate ending, Vaughan Williams' claim to the barcode was messy. It didn't make a lot of sense, but it was so unique and visionary. Cutting the barcodes out of his life would do a disservice to the picture as a whole. I went back and began the memoir with Vaughan Williams is the inventor of the barcode. From there, I strung together a vivid theoretical of what our world would be like without the man's great invention. Surely if it weren't for Vaughan, we would be submerged in eternal darkness and ruled by beta skeletons and other frightening creatures. I'm telling you, parallel dimensions are the best way of explaining anything. I sent him and his family copies of the memoirs, hoping that my pseudo-made-up history wouldn't rub anyone the wrong way. A couple of weeks later, I received a thank you card from Vaughan with a $15 check in it. And he died shortly after. It's not funny. I thought about buying a copy of Watcher in the Woods with that $15, but I only really like the alternate ending. Thank you.
Ryan Bradford, everybody.